to you. Some outraged reports about the evacuation of the Costa Concordia suggested that women and children had to fight men for a place on a lifeboat. It seems a very long way from the Titanic. The Titanic Memorial is dedicated to the brave men who perished in the wreck. They gave their lives, it says, that women and children might be saved. So whatever happened to women and children first, and where did that notion come from anyway? Professor Ed Galea is an evacuation specialist at the University of Greenwich. Professor, good morning to you.
Good morning.
What did happen on the Titanic?
Well, on the Titanic, it was a situation where there were limited lifeboats available, and there was certainly not enough for all the passengers on board. And the way the evacuation was organised was that women and children were given priority to board the lifeboats and hence to survive.
A decision made by the captain?
Well, a decision made by the crew who were organising the actual boarding of the lifeboats. And
was that the first time something of that nature had happened?
No, I mean, there was some time before that, in the 1800s, the Birkenhead disaster. It was a similar situation. It was a ship carrying mainly military personnel and a number of women and children. And in that situation, when the ship had hit a rock, very similar to what's happened on the Costa Concordia, the commanding military officer insisted that the soldiers maintain military discipline and allow the women and children to board the lifeboats and hence survive.
What about today, then? Is there any kind of, I don't know, a sort of Geneva Convention governing the way people ought to behave in these crisis situations?
Well, there's no regulations, international regulations that govern how people should behave. There are regulations that govern how evacuations need to take place and how they're organised. That's under the International Maritime Organization, which dictates international law of the sea. And but even in those regulations, there's nothing that specifies that women and children should be given priority.
Well, I know that you studied human behaviour in all sorts of incredibly difficult situations. If you can generalise, how does the human being react?
Well, I mean, I think contrary to popular belief, the way people behave in emergency situations is actually quite good in that it's people are obviously trying to save themselves, but they are also quite selfless. They will aid other people if assistance is required, and they will assist people in all sorts of severe situations. If a building's on fire, if a train is overturned, or even in a shipwreck. You'll find lots of cases where people have aided other people in evacuating.
So is it possible to have particularly brave men, particularly brave women? It's people who distinguish themselves. It's not either sex, presumably.
Indeed. No, that's absolutely right. I mean, it could be a male, it could be female. It's people tend to aid other people in emergency situations if they need help, if they're perceived to need help.
What do you think should happen? Is there any basis for prioritising women over men?
No, I don't think so. I think I think it's people should be trying to aid people who need assistance, and it's not like in the bygone era where it's ladies before gentlemen. In an evacuation situation, people are trying to save themselves, but they don't do that at the cost of other people. So this whole concept of panic, where people behave in this irrational way, that very rarely happens in an evacuation, and people will help each other. In fact, one of the things that we've learnt from countless disasters is that the social norms of society are maintained even in a disaster situation.
What do you mean? People will queue?
Well, not necessarily queue, but you wouldn't, at a bus stop, you wouldn't push your way through the bus stop and knock people over to get on the bus first.
Well, I wouldn't, Ed, but you do encounter people who do.
Well, it's very rare. I mean, I've been in the UK for 25 years, and I don't think I've seen people do that at a bus stop.
Are things different in Australia?
Not really, no. I mean, I think you find pretty similar behaviour. But the important thing is the social norms are maintained. And so perhaps in the early 1900s, when the Titanic happened, the social norm was more chivalrous, but in today's society, of equal opportunities and so on, that's not the case. But that's not to mean that people won't help other people in need.
Yeah, I feel very comforted actually from what you've said. Do you think that the media bears some responsibility for over-egging this whole notion of panic in these situations?
Absolutely. I mean, the media and Hollywood. I think it's so easy to say people panic. and it colours a wonderful picture, and it makes people want to read the stories and so on, when in fact that's really unfair to the people who have been put in these situations to label them as panicking. And you know, most people don't really understand what panic means. So even the survivors are describing their fellow survivors as perhaps panicking, when in fact they're scared, they're crying, or they're running towards an exit. That's not panic. That's a very rational behaviour.
Thank you very much indeed for talking to us. That's Professor Ed Galea, who's an evacuation specialist at the University of Greenwich. And still to come on Woman's Hour this morning, we've got Brit nominee Anna Calvi. She'll be singing live in the studio.